The Neighborhood, Richard Ramirez. On the morning of August 31st, 1985, a gaunt young man stepped off a bus in East Los Angeles, walked into a corner store, and saw his own face on the front page of every newspaper in the rack. For over a year, the man the press called the Night Stalker had terrorized Southern California, entering homes through unlocked windows in the heat of summer, killing 13 people, and leaving entire cities sleeping with their lights on. The day before, investigators had finally identified him, a single fingerprint lifted from a stolen car and matched by a brand new state computer system in one of its first great successes. And they had made the extraordinary decision to publish his name and photograph everywhere, effectively deputizing every citizen in California. Richard Ramirez looked at the newspapers, and the customers looked at him, and he ran. What happened next took less than 15 minutes, and the lapse had almost nothing to do with it. Ramirez fled through the neighborhood, tried to pull a woman from her car, and was chased off by bystanders. He jumped fences, tried another car, and the neighborhood came out of its houses. A man swung a metal pipe. Others joined, running him down street by street. And when he finally collapsed on Hubbard Street, bleeding and begging, the most feared man in California was being held down by ordinary residents of a working-class block, some still in their work clothes. A crowd growing around him, chanting that it was him, while someone ran to call the police. Officers arrived to find the Night Stalker already caught, and by some accounts their first job was protecting him from the crowd. He was convicted of 13 murders and died in prison in 2013, still awaiting an execution date California never set. The city had spent a fortune and a year hunting him. The people of one East LA neighborhood needed a quarter of an hour. Tracy Edwards, Jeffrey Dahmer. Just before midnight on July 22, 1991, two Milwaukee police officers saw a slim man walking down the street with a handcuff hanging from one wrist. His name was Tracy Edwards. He was 32 years old, and the story he told them sounded almost too strange to act on. A weird apartment, a man with a knife, hours of talking to keep the man calm, and finally a sprint for the door. The officers followed him back to apartment 213 of the Oxford Apartments, where a soft-spoken, polite man named Jeffrey Dahmer offered to get the handcuff key from the bedroom. One of the officers went first, and in that bedroom he found the photographs, and the calm night ended. Edwards had survived by instinct alone, talking, stalling, watching the knife, until one unguarded second gave him the door. Inside that apartment was the evidence of 17 murders committed over 13 years, and Dahmer would be convicted the following year and die in prison in 1994. And the most damning fact uncovered in the weeks that followed was that ordinary people had been sounding the alarm all along. Neighbors had complained for months about the smells. A 14-year-old boy had escaped that apartment 2 months earlier, drugged and incoherent, and residents, including a woman named Glenda Cleveland, had called police repeatedly, insisting something was terribly wrong, and been waved off while officers returned the boy to Dahmer's door. The boy did not survive that night. It is the darkest lesson in this entire video. The system had chance after chance handed to it by ordinary people, and the case finally broke only when one intended victim kept his head for hours, waited for his moment, and ran. Edwards' escape did what 2 years of ignored phone calls could not. Josefina Rivera, Gary Heidnik. In November 1986, a 25-year-old Philadelphia woman named Josefina Rivera got into a car with a man named Gary Heidnik and did not come home. Heidnik was a self-ordained bishop of a church he had invented, a man with a genius-level IQ who had turned a small investment into hundreds of thousands of dollars on the stock market while choosing to live in squalor, and in the basement of his house on North Marshall Street, he was assembling a nightmare, a pit and chains and, eventually, 6 captive women. 2 of them would not leave that basement alive. Rivera was the first taken, and she survived 4 months in that house by making a decision that sits close to the center of every survival story in this series. She studied him. Over those months, Rivera worked to become, in Heidnik's broken understanding, his ally, agreeing with him, calming him, absorbing punishments, until he trusted her enough to bring her upstairs, and finally, on March 24, 1987, to let her leave the house alone, on her promise that she would return with another woman. She walked to a gas station, called her boyfriend, and then the police, and within hours, officers were breaking into the basement and lifting the survivors out. Heidnik was convicted of murder and, in 1999, became the last person executed by the state of Pennsylvania. What lingers about the case is what Rivera endured afterward, because some coverage questioned her, the choices she made under absolute coercion, the performance that kept her and others alive. Investigators did not question it. Her testimony, delivered with the same composure that had fooled Heidnik, put him on death row, and the women who came out of that basement came out because the first woman taken had spent 4 months winning a monster's trust and then spent it all in one phone call. The farmer, Juan Corona. On May 19, 1971, a Japanese-American peach farmer named Goro Kagehiro was walking his orchard near Yuba City, California, when he noticed something small and wrong. A fresh hole dug between his trees, roughly the size of a door laid flat. He had not ordered any digging. That night, when he passed again, the hole had been filled in. Most people would have shrugged. Kagehiro, a meticulous man who knew every row of his land, could not let it go. A hole dug and refilled within a day meant someone had put something in his ground and wanted it forgotten. So he called the sheriff and asked them to dig. Mostly, he admitted, to settle his own mind. In the refilled hole, deputies found the body of a drifter. Over the next 3 weeks, they kept digging, through Kagehiro's orchard and the neighboring ranches, and found grave after grave, 25 migrant farm workers in all, men with no families nearby, hired for day labor and never missed, buried among the trees they had been paid to tend. In several graves lay receipts and papers bearing the name of the labor contractor who had supplied the men, Juan Corona, and in his possessions, investigators found a work ledger containing names that matched men in the ground. Corona was convicted on 25 counts of murder, at the time the most ever charged to one man in American history. When the verdict was overturned on appeal, the state simply tried him again, and a second jury reached the same 25 counts. He died in prison in 2019, having outlived nearly everyone connected to the case, except the question of how many more orchards were never dug. 25 men had vanished without a single report filed, because the world had decided they were not worth counting. The count began because one farmer noticed one hole in one row of peach trees and refused to assume it was nothing. A neighborhood with a metal pipe, a survivor with a dangling handcuff, a captive who outthought her captor, a farmer who trusted his own eyes over his own comfort. None of them had a badge, a warrant, or a weapon worth mentioning, and between them they ended 4 reigns of terror that had defeated entire police departments, 57 murders worth of unsolved darkness closed by civilians. The lesson is not that the professionals do not matter. It is that every impossible case is finally broken by a person who decides that what they saw, or survived, or suspected, is worth the trouble of saying out loud, and who keeps saying it until someone with a badge finally writes it down. Most monsters are not caught by heroes. They are caught by neighbors.